Eduardo, kick
And
it.
you're on the, yeah.
No, behind. You kick its back hip. The back. Kick it there with your foot. Nah.
We should detach our rope from the
You won't
front
make
and
it,
dress
cowboy.
backstage, right? So that it can do its turn.
Made in Taiwan.
121.
This relationship is basically of two human beings and can be even two parts of one human being.
This is the story of life. How many times we talk that when we have something, an adversity, some problem, that we are fighting windmills.
It's one of those operas that make you feel good about being a human being and believing in possibility.
It was one of the early works for this company, and apparently it did very well. I think they did 2 performances back then, and there'd been no thought of doing it after that. Interestingly, I think there's only 1 production of it in the country, and we wanted a particular look, and that's what Ralph and Missy have given us. And we're hoping that, like our Pearlfishers, other companies will become interested, rent it from us and get it around the country, because it's a work that deserves to be done very frequently. I wanted to make it a kind of homegrown product because we have so much talent here. Karen Keltner was always to conduct it because she's expert in so much music, but particularly French. And then when I found Ralph Funicello was here, and of course I know Missy West because she's regularly with us, I thought, let's get that team together and show what we can do with the home team, as it were. And I think it's equal to anything we've ever put on the stage. In some respects, it's even more clever. So that's basically it. I just wanted to keep the team together.
As long as we can.
It's not uncommon to retune between scenes. We hear that a little bit.
They usually between scenes, unless it's been a really, really long, like
Good.
Wagnerian first act.
Because it's actually better not to.
Yeah. The question is, if we're bringing up the text, are we going to want to bring house lights up? We're thinking this change is going to be like 3 to 4 minutes, probably.
It's going to be all of that, yeah.
We were, brainstorming, Ron Allen, myself, and trying to put Ian together with a good designer, and I knew Ralph Funicello's work from having seen a lot of his stuff at the Globe, and I've always been a big fan of what he's done. I never had really an opportunity to meet him or work with him. So we kicked his name around and set up a meeting with Ian and Ralph, and they got along famously, of course.
A new production needs an awful lot of thought before it's undertaken at all. Obviously, you need the basic participants. You can't do design until you have an idea of who you want. And even then, in a discussion with the designer, it may be that you don't see eye to eye. So Ralph and I had some chatting to do first before we decided we could work together. And it turned out that his view of how this should look was exactly the same as mine, similarly with Missy.
So then here, I thought, here's your biggest problem. That we bring up some version of the clouds, whether they're moving or not moving or whatever, but
Well,
dark.
before you do that, let's end the act.
Yes.
You have a building of a certain size, backstage, and you have to fit so many scenes into it. So you're always trying to find ways to do that economically in terms of money, but also economically in terms of reusing scenery, flipping it around and using, so that you can all fit it all in the building. And so I held off for the longest time designing the fourth act, which is her garden, and opens our, after it's the first scene after the intermission. And so finally, when I got to that, I just examined everything that I had already designed and said, okay, how can I reuse all this? And so then I made changes in it so that it could be used over again, and different pieces turned in different directions and different things in it. And it actually, I was very pleased with the way it came out. Ian basically said to me, I think we need a big set for the first act, because it's the town square and all this, these are the requirements. And then we need the windmill scene, and we need the, and how that works. And actually he said, let's put that on hold for a while, but it was actually one of the first things I designed, because it just seemed to me to be the easiest. Projections were my idea, I guess. What Ian suggested was, in some way we have to have some other windmills. Can we have, pieces come in, or what should we do? And I think I said, well, what if we did some kind of a projection or projection effect of spinning windmills that we could fade in and out, and really that he could fight with, that are sort of in the air around him. They're large scene shifts, and what do you do during that time? And Ian had a wonderful idea of projecting text from the Cervantes on the downstage scrim, to sort of set up each scene, and that would give us, while the audience read that, and it was a little bit something to see and to do while we were frantically changing the scenery upstage, and so I tried to tie those in with those slides in with where we're going, and what to sort of have an image of where we're going to go to with the text over it, and then we fade through that or whatever and go into the next scene. And that seemed to work. We think it's going to work rather nicely.
So it all starts in here. And we're finishing the last of the units. They're fitting up the frame around the door and the handrail. Then we'll take that piece apart, take it next door, and you'll see the final finishing touches as it gets all of the texture and distressing and architectural detail put on it. So Ralph starts with his sketches, then he develops the model, then we begin to get blueprints from him, and we take these blueprints and break it down into pieces of steel square tube and Luan and all of that other stuff. And then we take the whole thing next door and start to put the finishing touches on it. And after the model, then Ralph does these painter drawings, which show in much better detail what it is that we have to do to finish the unit. So then, once we've disassembled the unit, we bring it over here to the paint shop. And as you can see, we've exploded all of the walls. This is another unit entirely. And this is where all the finishing touches get put on by the scenic artists. They add the texture, they carve the detail, they add the bricks and all of that stuff. And then, of course, ultimately the painting, which is always layer upon layer upon layer of paint in order to get the depth of detail that the designers would like to have. There's good detail here of these little, of the ornament and hardware and stuff, some of which we can buy and some of which we have to manufacture. Well, here we have the model piece. This model piece is built in 1/4 inch to the foot scale, which basically means that 1/4 of an inch equals 1 foot in full size. So it's common for the designers to build them initially this small, and then sometimes they'll even build a second model to a larger scale because it has to have more detail. In this instance, Ralph was very happy with it just like it was, so it's our challenge to bring the detail that's in this tiny little model and all of this little work here to full scale. This is actually a reference model. This is not Ralph's model. He has a sketch of this horse which is significantly different from this guy, but it's a good reference for Deborah to work from in order to get the anatomy of the horse correct. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So John, this is the sort of the body of the large windmill. Those big aluminum blades that we saw over there go on a piece that's another probably 6 or 7 feet in that direction. The blades then will extend, if you could imagine that the center of them was about, say, over here, then the blade in its full length will come all the way down to about here, because those two pieces over there that are still in construction are more of what goes on the bottom of here. One of the wonderful things I like about working down here is these little moments, like here's the beginning of the burrow for Sancho, and it just sort of is hanging around the shop waiting to be completed ever so patiently.
There are moments where you have comic situations, but I would say that after the refusal of Dulcinea to the end, it's a very, very tragic piece. And therefore, everything should be done properly. Even the rocks where we are sitting, the tree must be done in a certain way, the sword must work in a certain way, the animals. I mean, it wasn't easy at the beginning to be on top there and to make it look true and real. And to do so, you need to believe that it's real. and then to know, for instance, in the scene where he's composing the new verses for Dulcinea, and it comes in on top of the horse, you need, of course, to know where you have to put your leg, and the leg was over the lance, but the lance was in a proper place. So it's a constant adjusting of little details and little props.
It usually starts with a prop list from stage management and or the director that says, in this scene, I would like, and then it's usually just a rough guide. Once it gets into the rehearsal hall, the things that you've pulled and the lists that you've made, I would say always changes. And most of the time changes dramatically once you see it on its feet. And the performers obviously have some input into it too. If it's not a music rehearsal, if it's staging, we're there. We talk to the ASMs, of course, the assistant stage managers, constantly about how things work, where these things want to go. But also, for instance, in this show, there are 2 campfires, and we provide the campfires, and then the electricians come in and put their fire effect and wiring in the wood campfire. So we're constantly telling people or asking people, answering questions. How does this work? Where does this play? How much cord do I need? We're creating a world out here, and all of the scenery and props, all of that is just, that's just stuff until somebody comes out and picks up the basket and brings and starts throwing the flowers and makes it come to life. So if we think the basket and the flowers are fine and everybody thinks it fine, that's good. But if the singer comes off and says, I kind of need some different color flowers in here, then you know you're not quite done yet.
This is really a local event. We've got a local director, a local designer, we've built the set. The costumes are being designed by Missy West, who's our wardrobe supervisor. She's been working with the company for, I don't know for sure, but many, many years. And this is the first chance that she's had a chance to design with us. So I think it's going to be really stunning. It's a beautiful production.
The novel Don Quixote was published in 1605, the first one, there are two. The first one was published in 1605, and I started out designing it in that period. I started that way, but in conversation with the director, we decided to loosen it up a little bit in terms of the silhouette for the women, to make it a little more, especially for Act 1, to make it more folksy. It's a festival, it's a town festival. So to bring in that element of people of a village rather than what people normally identify with as the Spanish silhouette, which is often court painting. So we loosened it up a little bit and we extended out the period to sort of cover about 100 years or so. And that's giving us a little bit more flexibility in terms of the silhouette and the ability of people to move more readily, because if we're in a very staid and stilted costume, they can't do what's being asked of them dramatically. So I don't think that we're going to miss the pumpkin breeches, and I don't think that we're going to miss the women with their costumes up to their necks. I think it's actually better for the whole piece that we've softened it. We haven't enslaved ourselves to the period. There are a couple of artists that I decided to focus on. The first one was Velázquez, who was painting in this early 17th century time. He painted a lot of people know him as a court painter, but he actually painted a lot of other stuff, not just religious. But he did muses, and they're just beautiful. There's a soft focus to them, and a naturalness that in some of the portraiture that's just lovely. It was that his color palette was so beautiful. And I also looked at Murillo, who is a lot known for his religious paintings, but when I went in to look, I was looking at his collection, the American collections of Murillo, and there are these just beautiful, beautiful portraits of beggar children and people in the street. And between the two of them, that it really gave me a good idea of what a village is and what the softness of the fabrics or the stiffness of the fabrics. I also looked a lot at Doré, who was drawing. He's an illustrator, and he actually worked in the 19th century, which is a little bit later. But he traveled to Spain in the early 19th century, about 1830s, with a writer, and they went around and illustrated Spain. In addition to those, Doré also is very famous for his Don Quixote drawings that he did in the 19th century. And they're wonderful because the novel itself is it's very comical, it's very humorous, dark, but it's very, very, very funny. And his drawings reflect that as well. I'm not only the costume designer of the show, but I'm also the costume supervisor of the department that's going to build it. So having worked here for so long, I also know the chorus. I know a lot of the people who are in it. So I had a good sense of what they would look like as a group of people, their body languages and how tall or short they may be. So yeah, in designing it, I started out just looking at the color and just looking at the silhouette. But I started narrowing it down and started to make fabric selections, actual fabric selections, I also called on the fact that I knew the people who were going to be in it. I knew who Fruccio was, and I knew who Denise Graves is. So I could, make those kinds of choices. It's a big undertaking, and it's really great when there's a company that wants to do that and that backs you up to do it, because we produce a really great product here. My costume shop is excellent. I'd put them up against anybody, really. We don't work as often to build new productions, but we work often enough, and there's enough talent in San Diego that we can do it.
We never begin unless we know we have a cast on hand as well. Maybe not yet engaged, but on hold. So once we knew we had the design worked out, we engaged the artists and got exactly what we wanted. Then we go into costume design, costume fittings, wigs and makeup. Construction of the set is followed through very carefully in the scenic studio because, of course, we built it ourselves. We've got a great scenic studio. And you sort of watch it growing like a mushroom as the time goes through. And as that happens, the sort of ownership, not only by me, but by Ralph and Missy and Karen, just blooms. And as it's being built, actually, I'm directing it at the same time. I see a piece of scenery and say, that's what I can do with that. That's the image that is going to convey, because the set model and the sketches never tell us everything.
You over there, including children, come around and just cover it a little bit as it turns around. Whenever you are in these areas and the animals are downstage, wave and come across in front of them a bit. Everybody out there knows they're fake, but the fun is trying to pretend that we don't know they're fake, okay? Because that's a part of the joke. So get really into it. Children over here, when you came in, the four of you, when you came in, the first two who go down, keep playing, then the other two who come down, don't get in a line. Try to make sure that your parents can see you.
Every score has stage directions in it that were recommended at some time by somebody, and frequently it was not the composer and the original librettist. I look at them, but I don't pay a lot of attention to them because everything has to come out of the music as I feel it, the conductor feels it, and the artists. So I will hear something in the music that I think needs a gesture, needs a response, and there's nothing in the score to say that's what happens there. So it all has to be looked at in the broad view, and I think we'll find in this production that there are many emotional moments with Don Quixote in particular that are emphasized, reinforced by the music the way they should be, but if you look at the libretto, there's a hole, there's nothing going on at all. And that is also one of the joys, when you find that moment, that gesture, and the music backs it up so well and the singer does it well, you know you found part of the core of the piece. When we grab them with this first 10 minutes, they're ours. And they'll finish up crying when Fruccio dies at the end, because they will have gone through the whole gamut of emotion. And you might too, because he is terrific. Denise is performing wonderfully, so is he, and Eduardo Chama, back from member Barber of Seville previously with Fruccio, really terrific. And you guys are the ones that set the scene for them. They won't be successful unless you pull the audience in, and it seems to me you're going to do it splendidly. So let's do this again from the top. The chorus, the supers, the dancers are vital to any production that they're in, of course. And it's never easy to work out what to do with them. They have to be there to sing, to be the villagers, but they can't be acting totally naturally because A, there's not enough room, and B, you rarely get a group of people like that together unless it's a political convention. So in working out what to do with them, you're looking at broad brushstrokes, and over the years leading up to this production, I had ideas of where they would be. I discussed them with my wonderful assistant Katura, and then get her to do the initial blocking. So there's a partnership between a director and the assistant in that regard. What else?
Guys, there was a big, again with the horse and the donkey, this group over here was very well spaced out once they'd been put into place. This group over here has pushed themselves all the way back against the wall. You can move in a little closer to that donkey after Sancho gets off. Do you know what I'm talking about? Great.
And you look for the right flow, the right shape. You've got to leave room for the dancers so that they can do their thing without knocking anybody over. And it's a constant case of correction almost up to the final rehearsal with the chorus, because when you're in the rehearsal room, you have a sense of a certain space. When you get into the auditorium, the space frequently looks bigger, and you find areas where the chorus should have been put that you didn't do in the rehearsal in the rehearsal room. So that's always changing around far more than the soloists, because with the soloists you can get so much detail because they occupy less space. But chorus, dancers, animals, children, they create a great demand in terms of the geography and the choreography for those. The biggest challenge really are the animals, because we have a horse and we have a donkey. Making them work the way we want in the windmill scene, for example, and in 3 of the scenes in the opera of 5, the horse and the donkey actually appear. So having them to manipulate the right way, the horse has a head that bobs, getting those to run across is one element, but there is another one, and that is dance. Dance is so important in Act 1 that the whole opera begins with a spectacular Spanish dance group, and that's worth coming anyway. And then they return, some of them, in Act 4. So getting the right choreographer, getting the right look for those dancers is a critical thing.
It is the lot of an opera choreographer to always be faced with different styles of dance, and inevitably you're never going to be an expert in all of them. But having trained as a classical dancer, but having had a pretty much all-round training as well, I had done some flamenco at school, and then some sort of classical flamenco in the classical ballet company, and obviously admired the technique very much. I was very lucky to be able to find an assistant, a local assistant here, who is a wonderful flamenco teacher and dancer, who was able to assist me in realizing basically the technique, the steps, the skeleton of what I wanted to do. I had seen actually a video of a very fine production that was done in Paris in 2000 with Sam Raimi, and there was some magnificent flamenco dancing, but in my view, it was just a dance display. It really said nothing about the community and indeed about trying to create the environment for the opera. The curtain goes up and immediately we see this marketplace, and it's a festival, it's a celebration. And so I wanted to try and draw in, for example, we have some of the children dancing, we have a couple of the chorus dancing, as well as the dancers, and of course then Dulcinea also does some dancing as well.
Give her an E.
Coming to work with Denise, who obviously I had heard of by reputation and I had admired tremendously, I had known obviously of her magnificent performances as Carmen, and clearly within that role you have many dances that you have to do. So I was fairly sure that she would be open to doing more, and indeed she was.
Actually, it helps the singing. I always think that it does, because anytime that you're in oxygen and you're using your energy and you're using your breath and you have to learn to be on your breath, all of that stuff reinforces what it is that we're trying to do anyway as singers, and it excites my breath and it excites my person. So it's a real pleasure to do it.
Coming from Dulcinea, Ms. Denise Graves. Right above me is a Sancho, the devoted sidekick to Don Quixote, Eduardo Chama. And in the starring role of Don Quixote, our beloved Ferruccio Forlinetto.
The singers themselves, not much of a problem. They're very experienced people. When I give them ideas, they take the idea and run with it. There have been no conflicts of any kind. It's the happiest cast, I think, we've seen in our theatre, and all of them brilliant in their roles. There are some scenes that are very moving. For example, in Act 4, when Don Quixote is made fun of by the chorus, by all of these villagers, because she has refused to marry him. Dulcinea has gone out very reluctantly after he proposed marriage, but she knows it can't work. And the crumpled Don Quixote that is projected by Ferruccio from this wonderful, noble character who believed that he might be a knight, to a man who is totally rejected. That transition is beautiful. And as he leaves the stage and leaves his armor behind, we know that it's over for Don Quixote. That's a moving scene, but we go straight from that into the death scene of Don Quixote. And it's only two people on stage. It's him and Sancho. It's a very narrow focus. And in the rehearsal a few days ago, our Sancho, Eduardo Chama, cried during the death scene when Ferruccio was doing the singing. When you can get that from the artists, you know that they are inside the roles. Very, very satisfying.
La lumière, l'amour.
Perhaps a little gentle shake of the head at that.
Qui me fascine. Qui That's weird.
You've got it.
Don Quixote is amazing, an amazing role, a role that is the one I love the most. The humanity that you find in this role, of course it's not real, because you will never find somebody who is really totally in love with nature, with human beings, and with everybody. I mean, whatever is on the surface of this planet is something that moves his love, his affection. And this is amazing. I mean, to have the privilege to be for 3 hours this amazing character is a dream.
La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la la
with the exception of one beautiful aria that Dulcinea has at the end, the one that then will be replayed by the cello just before the death of Don Quixote. All the rest, the most beautiful melodies are linked to the character of Don Quixote. And this music, these melodies, which are absolutely splendid.
Hold, hold, hold. Now you can relax a bit. You're watching. You're listening to the boss.
Voyant ta face pâle, tes grands traits émouvants, le divin zigzag, et tes yeux, fulgurants de sublime clarté. Où vas-tu? Que veux-tu?
Je suis le chevalier et qui redresse les torts. Un vagabond d'inondé de tendresse pour les mères en deuil, les gueux, les opprimés, pour tous ceux qui
Also, the text in this piece is beautiful and full of poetry. And Don Quixote is the personification of poetry. So the two things together are creating, let's say, this privileged role in the opera. After all, is the title role, and after all, is a myth, and it will be studied and read by generations and generations to come. Because after all, this is the story of life. How many times we talk that when we have something, an adversity, some problem, that we are fighting windmills.
Moi le haut cheval
start going up
There is a mutual addiction to the adventures, which I like. I think Quixote is a really bad character, a person that came in a modern time with dreams of an old time. And Sancho likes this attention, likes this excitement of going on these magical trips that he knows that he will never get. I mean, Quixote promised him many things during these trips, and he never gets them. And also, Quixote doesn't have any money. So Sancho it's not for the money, it's not for the goods, it's for the excitement of being with a dreamer, that I think that we miss that today a lot.
Regardez donc, c'était des modes qui passaient puis sans les yeux. Et par les rues, et les filles jeunes et ces vieux. Regardez, regardez. Pourquoi ce chant vieux? Pourquoi son regard qui brille? Pourquoi? C'est que la vie s'entrunit.
Sancho is a married man that, in another way, he wants to get away from his wife. And that's another reason, it's a good reason to go with Don Quixote, so I can be away from my wife. Quixote is in his craziness, which it can be discussed even in the Cervantes book. If he's really crazy, or if he's really is tired of what he's seeing in the modern times of, the Renaissance then, and he want to come back to the Middle Ages because there was a more honorable way to live. In this relationship, which I think it is important, that they are both feeding each other with knowledge, with adventures, with taking care of each other. And I think the fact that Dulcinea comes a little in between them makes Sancho a little jealous, because this is a reality that he knows that Don Quixote can't see. This is part of the problem, I will say, in all the book. He knows that Dulcinea will eventually crush or destroy his heart, and that will lead to his death.
Dulcinea here is a very interesting character. There is an admiration of the feminine by Don Quixote to and for Dulcinea, which epitomizes his sense and sensibility for what he believes is the feminine gift to the world.
Your eyes follow her.
Oh, keep going.
Yeah.
Who is Dulcinea? She is called in the opera an enchantress. She is a young woman. I guess she's 20, although that's questionable because she sings about when a woman is 20. She doesn't exactly say that she's 20 years old. But in any case, she is a young woman who I think enjoys very much being a young woman. And has now arrived at the stage of her life where she also begins to question what the meaning of life is. And although it's wonderful to have fun, one also searches for a deeper meaning in life. And one searches for something or someone more substantial. And so she's just at this position in her life where she has begun to ask herself that question.
Vous m'empêchez de couper la gorge à mon adversaire. Mais l'oxyre à l'instant.
It's just a question of timing. I think she needs a few more years yet. He's certainly advanced in where he is and how he's settled in himself. And I think that they both recognize that they have this like quality, but they also recognize that it's just not the right time.
Alza! ta-ta.
The matter of French composers tackling, as it were, Spanish music seems to be quite pervasive in all the wonderful French opera composers. Having done Pearl Fishers relatively recently and often, that's not Spanish music, but it is again a fascination with a composer of things, or for things exotic. And I think Spain, keeping itself a little apart and a little wild, still was an exotic place for the French. Now the French travel regularly to Spain. I don't know in the time, for example, of Massenet, how much actual traveling was done, but it certainly wasn't, in my opinion, the westernized civilization to the extent that Italy was. The orchestration takes us through various styles of music. He harks back, Massenet harks back to almost a French Baroque period in some of a big chorus that starts in a very Baroque way and then is picked up with the orchestra. And when we come on playing that, the musicians initially, it's not hard to play, but initially think, what is this doing here? What do you mean it's in two? And once we start the actual swing of it, everybody sees that it's very, very much like an earlier style of French music. Massenet uses a lot of grace notes to give us pieces of comedy or inflection of mood or pungency of moment or poignancy of moment. Not just grace notes, but the way he places them. I also love some of his, well, all of his orchestration. To me, it's masterful. Massenet uses such simplicity in so much of this. It's not necessarily simple to play, although it's not technically horribly demanding, but to make it sound beautiful and French, one has to have an aesthetic of moderation and grace and nobility and agility. It is simple in many places, but that is its utter value. And I personally feel very, very strongly in the camp of those who love simplicity, who appreciate moderation, and who think that it has a real place in our aesthetic as well as our civilization.
go to the side.
Hello.
That's it.
How are you? Nice to see you.
That's it. You stay there.